Woman is thrashed, stripped and paraded naked for absolutely no fault of hers. She just happened to be at the wrong time at the wrong place. Is India a racist country? That's an uncomfortable reality that confronts us from time to time, and it is confronting us tonight as well. Joining us on our Talking Point panel here in our studios, Taba Doni is the president of the Arunachal Students' Union here in Delhi. Veer Sanghvi, columnist, and Professor Sanjay Srivastav is sociologist with JNU. Before I come to Taba Doni, Veer, I don't know if you got a chance to listen to the Bangalore police commissioner. I mean, I was shocked when he said that this is not racism, this is a case of road rage. I mean, I had half a mind of saying, with all due respect to him, that he seems to be out of his mind.
Well, Zaka, you destroyed him on television, so there's not much more one can add, except, and I'm certainly not going to call a public servant a liar on television, but what he is effectively doing is he's saying everybody else is lying. He's saying that the Tanzanians are lying. He's saying that this woman made up a story about being stripped naked because women apparently enjoy making up these stories. He's saying that the lawyer who says the police were unhelpful is also lying. All this to justify this absurd claim that only one person, the driver, was attacked. I mean, what can one say? The incident is shameful enough, but the response of the police, I think, shames us all as Indians.
And that's part of the problem, is it, Taba Doni? I mean, you've experienced racism firsthand. Part of the problem is authorities, people in powerful positions, and particularly policemen, seem to be in denial about it. They seem to, I mean, you heard the police commissioner, you were listening to the entire conversation with the police commissioner, and I was just shocked when he said this is not racism, this is just a case of road rage. Is that an experience that you share as well, that when you go to complain about what is rank racist crime, the police turn around and say, oh, ye to minor baat hai, ye to minor jhagda hai?
Yeah, it's very funny when one responsible person use such kind of words. It's like they are running away from their duty. It was good if it was spoken by any constable or those who were not in such a rank, but it's very unfortunate to hear our commissioner Bengaluru saying that this is just a case of road rage. It's very unfortunate, but I would like to say if such kind of acts keep on continue, then one day this incredible India will be turned towards unbearable India. And I'm very sorry to use this word, but such kinds of response from Commissioner of Bengaluru is very much unexpected, and especially if see, there have been so many cases. We are talking about this racism. We are fighting for racism. If you take the case of our late brother Nido Tania, recently second death anniversary this 30 has passed. If we see after that, there have been so many kind of new rules implementation, that Bejbora committee, there have been so many of rules. But my question is this, to bring something good in constitution or to bring something good for the society, why any innocent should lose his life, or something untoward accident should happen to them? We must prevent before it's too late. And I think the person sitting in a position, in a powerful position, all to our concerned ministers, to our concerned police officers, and those who are responsible for our safety all over India, they should take their responsibility seriously.
Seriously, and certainly I don't think the words of the Bangalore Police Commissioner inspire any confidence to that end. Professor Srivastav, I don't know if you got a chance to hear what the Commissioner was saying, essentially saying that, look, this was a minor incident, it was a localized incident, it got blown up because the media happened to arrive there and so on, and this certainly, according to him, is not a crime of racism. Do you think that's part of the problem, this whole denial about racist crime?
Yeah, you know, one of the things that's happened in many Western countries is that the recognition of a particular problem. So when Indians are attacked in Sweden or in the UK, the police do recognize that there is a problem, and then you deal with it.
Yeah.
So, and in this particular case, I think we have to, it's really difficult to kind of tear apart sort of mob mentality from racism. And we are a deeply racist society, and as your last speaker was saying, that racism extends to people who are otherwise Indian citizens, so people from the northeast.
Yeah.
So unless we actually recognize that our cities are not the cosmopolitan places we keep insisting that they are, we're never going to actually deal with this problem. So we have this whole thing about globalization and people traveling. But it doesn't seem to necessarily alter the manner in which we view people from Africa. And we borrowed that kind of mentality from how the West used to view black people. And so we've kind of become the new colonialists. And, you know, it's important to realize also that, of course, it is a police problem, but it is not only a police problem, because the police is, after all, part of the larger mindset that there is in our society.
Yeah.
So unless we recognize that there is a problem, I mean, we'd be the first one to jump up and down if something like this happened to an Indian, right?
Yeah,
and we'd say that the
exactly.
police there don't recognize this racism.
Exactly.
But we are completely unwilling to recognize the fact of a specific deep-seated problem in our society, and we're not going to get rid of it by saying, you know, if there is a river, if you jump into the river saying there's no water, doesn't mean that you're not going to drown, right?
Yeah.
You don't know how to swim. We have to recognize that there is a problem
and we're certainly not going to get rid of it if we fail to see this, what is a rank racist crime, for what it is. Gautaman Ranganathan is a lawyer in Bengaluru. He's joining us live tonight. Gautaman, do you feel that, I mean, I don't know if you got a chance to listen to what the police commissioner was telling us just earlier, but I was just shocked out of my wits that the Commissioner of Police of Bengaluru, who should be inspiring confidence to the citizens of Bengaluru, as well as particularly to the vast number of African students who are studying in the city of Bengaluru, actually doesn't think that this is a racist crime. In fact, he thinks this is a very localized affair. It got blown up because the media happened to be there at the time, and then suddenly the national media is going all crazy over the story when it should not be looked at as a racist crime. I mean, is that again just the fact that he's living in deep-seated denial about this problem?
Yes, so by just not calling it racism, it does not cease to be racism, and this is something we hear often when we interact with the police officials, which is that they ask you to not call it a racist incident and not to use big terms, in fact. So it is definitely a racist incident, and also what I really want to point out today is that it is literally the aggregation of a lot of subtle events and the tensions that has been building up in Bangalore. Though this might be very well reported and actually very gory in nature, there are many instances that has been happening in Bangalore. So we have many private institutes that are advertising it as the ultimate destination for African students to come and study in Bangalore, and all these institutions are in the far-flung areas, and they have to have a residential permit, and the interaction between the locals and the African students have been strained, and there is not much effort taken by the police to ease that out. There have been very mild, minor efforts by the police, but it has been often in the terms of the police, but never really on the terms of the student in trying to truly understand what are the concerns these students face. And also to add to this, most of the students who come to study in India, and in particular Bangalore right now, do not come from very well-off families, and
they don't.
They are in fact coming heavily indebted, and to not acknowledge their concerns and to taint them all. And often another really unfortunate event that happens is when we go to the police seeking redressal for crimes against African students, we are often told that how African students are actually running drug mafias, how the women are taking to sex work, and how the women are so inappropriately clothed, which is not very conducive to Indian culture. And we are really tired of listening to all these as if all that justifies the violence against students.
Yeah,
so
and
it
that's
definitely
typical.
is a racist event.
That's typical racial stereotyping, isn't it? That you think all African men are drug dealers and all African women are prostitutes. I mean, that is typical racial profiling. That's racial stereotyping. I mean, here's what I'm trying to understand, Veer Sangvi. So where does the solution lie? I mean, the stereotype and the racism is certainly the underlying problem, but I think, as is evident in this case and as was evident in past cases as well, the lethargy of policemen, the almost reluctance of policemen to register cases, I mean, how can we help solve that? For example, in the case of students from the Northeast, like here in Delhi, for example, they've instituted an entire Northeast cell. So if there's anybody from the Northeast who feels aggrieved or who feels he or she is a victim of a crime, and a racist crime at that, then he or she can approach that Northeast cell. I'll get Tabadoni in a moment to try and get his thoughts on whether that cell is working, but the general impression seems to be that was a step in the right direction. Is it time, Veer, then for a separate cell which will deal with African students, given the huge number of African students who seem to be studying in colleges, not just in Bangalore, by the way, but across colleges in this country?
Oh, absolutely, Zaka. But the question is, who is going to man these cells? You've heard the Bangalore police commissioner. I've dealt with people in the police force in other states who reinforce exactly the same stereotypes we've talked about, that they're lazy, they're criminals, Africans are violent, they all import cocaine, the women are sex workers, they're loose. And in many ways, it was the same kind of stereotyping about Northeasterners also, that the men do nothing, they drink, the women are loose, etc. So the problem has to be, the problem really has to be, can you find a way around the stereotyping? It's okay to say that there will be a cell and maybe people can complain, but you've got to make sure that the people who man that cell are free from those kind of prejudices. In the case of Northeasterners, to some extent, to some limited extent we found it. In the case of Africans, I find the most racist people are actually the police.
Yeah, and you know, everybody remembers this famous incident when the first Aam Aadmi Party government, there was a minister, Somnath Bharti, led this so-called moral raid in an area of Delhi, pretending that there was some kind of drug cartel operating there or some kind of prostitution racket operating there. So if that's the mentality of our elected representatives and that's complemented by the mentality of the police, then, you know, it's a real shame.
Forgive me.
Yeah.
Forgive me for interrupting. I saw that Somnath Bharti raid on television, and what worried me most was not that Somnath Bharti did this, which was bad enough, but the people, the alleged supporters who followed him, kept using the N-word while referring to the Africans over there.
Yeah.
If that is the mentality, if they think it's okay to talk like that, what hope is there?
Does the Northeast cell, now, as I understand, there's a senior level police officer under whom this cell operates here in the Delhi police. Has that made any difference to your lives? I mean, has it made it any easier?
Yeah, I would say because we have a nodal officer, IPS 3, Hibu Robin. He's the Joint Commissioner, and he also hails from Northeast states.
Yeah.
And because of his personal interest for our Northeast people, and these days we find that this specially Northeast cell, we have so many of groups, and he's taking personal steps. So therefore, I find that Delhi police is a bit cooperative these days.
Do you think a similar idea for African students, given there are a huge number of African students across big cities in India, having a special cell in each of these police forces across the big cities would be a good idea for specifically for African students?
I would say that it should be for every nation. Okay. Those who are facing problem, there should be a emergency for, especially these days. If we see among Indians, we notice people are the one who really face this problem, and if we say outside our country, these African people are the one in number. So I think the police, especially those who are here to safeguard us, and all the individuals, whether it's from India or from outside, they should give special care, extra care and special protection, especially to those Africans and to the peoples, those who are in need.
Professor Srivastav, I mean, you know, it's one thing to try and get our police force to be more sensitive to whether it's to people from the Northeast or whether it's to African students, but that doesn't inherently change our own sort of deep-rooted mindsets, and there is a mindset problem. I mean, you can spend crores on Incredible India and Atitui Devo Bhava tourist campaigns and hope that tourists come to India, but one incident such as this and it gets blown up, I mean, that doesn't encourage, or that certainly doesn't encourage anybody, any tourists from coming. I mean, it sends a very, very wrong message about India. I mean, so what do we do to tackle the mindset issue, which I admit it's not going to change overnight or change in the next month or the next year, but it has to be a work in progress.
Yes, yes. Absolutely. I mean, look, I agree that part of the solution has to be how policing is done, but as I said earlier, the police are part of the larger culture from which the policemen and policewomen are drawn. And I work in the university sector, and even I think by the time people come to university, unless they've had some education at the school level about ideas of racism and about ideas of why cultures need to reflect, about how we think about people who look different to us and who speak other languages, other kind of food. I think by the time the people, even when they come to university and they haven't actually had that background, that kind of education, it's almost too late. So I think policing is only really a part of the problem. It's like saying that if you pass a law against sexual assault, that will get rid of all the problems of sexual assault or domestic violence. Clearly you need to have laws, but something needs to be done much earlier, and we can only do that much earlier if we recognize that there is a problem that needs to be addressed. If we recognize that there's no such thing like a perfect culture. We constantly say that our culture is full of tolerance, our culture is full of a wonderful civilizational history, which is true, but cultures always need to self-reflect, and part of that has to be deliberate thinking about the kinds of things that we do and the kind of things we ought not to do. And that really has to begin much earlier at a young age, because these are the kids who will grow up to become whatever, police officers and academics and sociologists and lawyers and journalists. So it really has to begin much earlier, and our schooling system has absolutely no framework for such education.
Gautam and Ranganathan, I mean, again, policing is one part of the problem, a very important part of the problem, and that needs to be addressed straight away. But even for everyday things, I mean, I don't know if you got a chance to listen to that story that we played out just before this discussion. Some of the African students were saying how difficult it is to get a house on rent. I mean, people simply refuse to let out their house to African students. There was this instance of a young African lady student who was saying that she had gone to a doctor once and they had to wait outside, and she sat at this bench which had other patients waiting in queue as well. And the moment she sat, everybody just stood up and walked away. I mean, and then she turns around and says, why? Am I a pest? I mean, do I look diseased to you? Why are these people walking away? I mean, that's a larger mindset issue that needs to be addressed. I mean, you can talk about the policing problem. That's an easier part of the problem to take care of. But the mindset problem is probably going to take years, generations maybe.
Yeah, definitely. Just a very brief comment on the policing also. You had mentioned as a separate cell. Here also we had initiated a dialogue with the police, and we had something called as the African Students Peace Coordination Committee that got constituted, and we had a couple of meetings. But the tone of these meetings were such that they would call all the African students and say what the Indian laws are and how they need to abide by the laws if they were to stay here, and if they were to go against these laws, then they will have to face repercussions. And the way in which this this event was scheduled itself kind of defeated the purpose. And that takes me to the response to the second part of your question, which is on the mindset change. I personally believe that a lot of mindset or the biases can be changed if there is facilitation of healthy dialogue between people, at least in areas where African students are living a lot. And I feel in that, so the police, on the one hand, of course, another fear that I have is when we ask police to be more cautious is that they take recourse to even more policing, and they take recourse to, and then I wouldn't be surprised if more African students are going to be deported in the coming days just because they want to get rid of them because of the news that is being reported. So I would urge the police not to just take up policing in that aggressive sense, but also realize that they need to facilitate dialogues, the area committee meetings, and make sure that the paying guest accommodations and the colleges and the FRRO come together monthly or bi-monthly once to address the concerns of African students. Make sure that people understand that these are not like demons as they are made out to be at times in the media and a lot of times by people around them. And I think that dialogue facilitated by the police would definitely go a long way in addressing these issues.
And Veer Sanghvi, how much does, I mean, while we celebrate unity and diversity and so on, if you look at our big cities, they're just basically sort of giant ghettos. I mean, you look at the city of Mumbai, the Muslims stay in one area, the Parsis stay in one area, the Gujarati community stays in one area, the Marathis stay in one area. How much of this ghettoization is making us insular as communities, as a nation?
Well, Zaka, to be fair, I think That's a very unfair characterization of Mumbai. I don't think it's a collection
it's
of
true of
communal
any
ghettos.
city, by the way.
I
It's
think
true of any city.
there's much social intercourse than you suggest. But I'm not optimistic about our attitude to Africans, mainly because if you look at Northeasterners, it's undeniable that since we've all met more Northeasterners, the average Indian is less prejudiced than he used to be, say, 20 years ago. In the case of Africans, I am not that optimistic, and I'll tell you why. It seems to be something very deep-rooted in India. There were many, many Gujaratis and Sikhs who lived in East Africa till about the 60s and 70s, when their number lessened mainly because they were thrown out. Very few of them had any African friends. You go to Trinidad, you go to Guyana, you talk to people over there, and they still have such prejudices about the black people who live with them, who they should be friends with. You go to the United States, you meet the Indians who live there who are successful, very few of them will have black friends. Many of them will marry Americans, very few of them will marry black Americans. So it's more deep-rooted than just a problem in India. It's something perhaps genetic.
And it's the thing that's so stark about it, Professor Srivastav, is that, I mean, the father of our nation, a large part of his life, early life at least, was in South Africa. I mean, his ideas were shaped by the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. We celebrate Nelson Mandela in this country, and yet, whenever there's a Tanzanian student or a Ugandan student, we tend to look at them from the narrow prism, or this completely bigoted, completely stereotyped, racially stereotyped perspective of whether they are a potential drug dealer or a potential prostitute. I mean, that's so hard to explain.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is hard to explain. It's not really hard to explain, and I'm trying very hard not to agree with Mr. Veer Sanghvi, but I'm kind of having to move in that direction. I'm almost against myself. Many Africans will say that unfortunately, attitudes of even our famous nationalist leaders like Mahatma Gandhi towards Africans were perhaps not the ones that they would really think were something that is, although he may have been shaped by anti-apartheid. So it is something deep-rooted, but I have to say that if the West and the white people have a much more immediate, a much more violent history against Africans, against black people in general, if change can happen in those societies, then I have to believe that it is not something biological. I mean, that it is cultural, it is social, and that change can happen. It will take a long time, and it takes really sustained kind of measures to do that. But but as a sociologist, I certainly, although I agree with Mr. Sanghvi that there's a deep-rooted problem.
No, it again comes back. I mean, to a lesser degree.
Frustration, you say it's deep-rooted.
No, to a lesser degree, it's also reflected in our obsession with fair skin.
My only sense is that if.
No, to a lesser degree, it reflects in our obsession with fair-skinned brides and grooms, with the popularity of fairness creams in this country.
But absolutely.
What explains that?
But the Anglo-American and the white world, look, I mean, that has a very long history. And we can't really go into this in this particular program. But what I'm saying to you is that given the history of the West and its relationship with Africa and what it did to Africa, if Western attitudes can change to whatever extent they've changed, and it's a far more violent, immediately violent history, then I have to believe that if we are able to take certain measures that various of your speakers have suggested, that these attitudes that we have in India will change. And surely some of our attitudes towards, say, women have changed. We can't say exactly the same attitude that we had across the board 100 years. So we have to believe that the attitudes change because these are social and cultural attitudes. If the white people can change their attitudes towards Africans and their societies have a fundamentally violent history towards Africa, then we have to say that this society will change. But it has to be a recognition that there is a problem. It cannot be that things are perfectly fine with us. They're not.
And in the Western countries, changed to the extent that today you have a black man as the president of the United States, and yet you see what happened in a place like Ferguson a few months ago with riots in that city, and you talk about race relations in the U.S. In the modern day and age. But I want to get a couple of closing comments, both here in our studio as well as Gautaman, who's joining us from Bengaluru. In terms of the immediate addressal of this issue, Gautaman, I asked the police commissioner, has anybody been arrested? He said no. I asked him, is this a case of racism? He said no. I asked him, was there a delay in filing the FIR? Again, he said no. Is this just a classic strategy to try and scuttle this whole probe, or do you actually believe that the Bangalore police will do a fair job of investigating this case and getting to the bottom of who was part of that lynch mob and arrest them and put them before the process of law?
If there is the will to do that, I'm sure they can do that. And like I said, this incident is not an isolated incident. There were 4 African women who were beaten up by the conductor in the bus a few months ago, and when they went to the police station, instead of filing a case against the conductor, there was a case filed against the 4 women for assaulting the conductor, which I feel is very shocking to believe. And but I really hope that things will change for the better, at least from going forward. And I really don't think it's going to be so difficult to conduct an investigation to identify the people involved in the mob, because we know the area and there are enough power with the police to do the investigation. So I just hope that the victim and the accused are brought to justice as soon as possible.
All right. I'll give you, Tabaduni, the final comment. If there's one thing that you would want police forces, whether they're in Delhi or whether they're in Bangalore, to do, which would go a long way in addressing your concerns, what would that be?
Regarding Delhi, Northeast Cell has opened, and for us, it's doing very fine. I would like to request all the police commissioner of different states, where mostly states for educational areas, especially like Bangalore, Delhi, Punjab, Chandigarh. I would like to request all of them to kindly take the good initiative, so that we may feel protected and we may feel free and to go anywhere and to stay anywhere. There should be no any sort kind of discriminations where we feel scared of going or of thinking or of showing our advice or of our words that are coming out from our mouth. So what we think is that police, they should give the full protection, and especially a good initiative like this Northeast Cell, and especially kind of advertisement that to make good use of people mind, to change the people advertisement in a good mindset, to change the mindset, they should do it.
All right, thank you very much, Tabaduni, here in our studios, Veer Sangvi, Gautaman Ranganathan, and Professor Srivastav for joining us on this fascinating conversation. I really hope that the police force in Bengaluru gets to the bottom of this case, because this has become a test case of whether they have the will, whether they have the capability, and whether they have the mindset to go after people in this lynch mob. Because, I mean, what happened